Good Friday, 1964. The clock reads 5:36 in the afternoon, and across Alaska the day feels utterly ordinary. Then the ground begins to move, and it does not stop. For 4 minutes and 38 seconds, the Earth refuses to be still. This is no ordinary tremor that rattles windows and passes. The land itself starts to behave like something alive and liquid. Whole neighborhoods slide toward the sea. The soil opens into fissures. The coastline of a continent quietly rearranges itself. Waves as tall as a 10-story building gather offshore and begin their silent race toward towns that have no idea they are coming. For the length of 5 long minutes, the most powerful earthquake in North American history rewrites the map of the far north. By the time the shaking ends, nothing here will ever look the same, and the science of the entire planet will begin to change. Because what happens on this single afternoon does far more than destroy buildings and reshape a young American frontier state. It hands scientists a puzzle they have argued over for decades, and an answer they are not yet ready to fully understand. How can a distant, sparsely settled corner of the world quietly rewrite everything we believe about the ground beneath our feet? How does a place with so few people become the key that finally unlocks the deepest secret of how our planet actually works? And why do some coastal villages face the sea before any warning could ever exist, in an age that has no word for the wave itself? The official story remembers the ruins and the maps. It often forgets the quiet revolution in understanding that follows them. To see how a single afternoon changes both a state and a science forever, we must first return to the world as it stands before. Alaska in 1964 is the newest state in the Union, admitted barely 5 years earlier, still finding its footing and its identity. It is a land of enormous distance and small population, where a few growing towns cling to a vast and unforgiving coastline. The whole state holds fewer people than a single mid-sized city, scattered thin across a territory larger than any other. Anchorage is the largest city, a modest place of glass storefronts and new construction, proud of its recent, rapid arrival. In these years, the far north is still a frontier in the American mind, a place of restless optimism and constant building. New roads and new harbors push outward each season, and the young state measures its future in growth and open possibility. Along 4th Avenue, shops and theaters line the street, and the business district rises with the confidence of a boom town. To the south, Valdez and Seward serve as busy ports, where freighters dock and longshoremen move cargo along wooden waterfronts. The canneries and the docks are the heart of many towns, and the fishing calendar shapes the rhythm of every coastal life. On Prince William Sound, small fishing villages like Chenega hold generations of Alaska Native families in quiet, remote bays. Life here follows the rhythm of the sea and the seasons of fishing boats, canneries, railways, and long northern winters. March falls in the quiet season, before the fleets sail, so the harbors hold fewer boats and fewer crews than in high summer. The people of this coast have always trusted the ground beneath them, as every people everywhere has trusted it before them. For the science of the age also trusts that ground, believing the continents to be fixed, ancient, and essentially unmoving. In the wider world of science, a fierce debate simmers over whether the continents themselves can drift across the globe. A few bold researchers argue that the surface is broken into moving plates, but the evidence for it remains stubbornly thin. In 1964, the theory of plate tectonics is still an outsider idea, doubted by many respected scientists and far from accepted. The notion that great plates of rock might dive beneath one another has almost no direct proof anyone can point to and measure. Most textbooks still teach a stable, unchanging crust, and the boldest new ideas are treated as speculation, not as fact. Geologists know that earthquakes happen, But the deep machinery that drives the largest of them remains a genuine mystery. There are no tsunami warning centers watching this coast, and the word tsunami itself is barely used in ordinary conversation. People speak instead of tidal waves and seismic sea waves, names that hide how little anyone truly understands the danger. There is no network of sensors, no sirens, no plan for the coastal towns that sit only feet above the reach of the ocean. This is the world. On the afternoon of March the 27th, a young state resting on ground it believes to be solid. Families gather for the Good Friday holiday. Schools stand empty. Offices close early. The streets are unusually quiet. That quiet, as it turns out, will save many lives, though no one walking through it can possibly know that yet. The sun sits low. The air is cold and clear. Beneath the calm surface of Prince William Sound, the pressure reaches its limit. For centuries, two vast plates of the earth have been locked together here, one slowly grinding beneath the other, unseen. The strain has been building for lifetimes, storing the energy of 1,000 ordinary quakes in the silent rock below. On this ordinary holiday afternoon, in a place few in the world could find on a map, that stored energy finally breaks free. At 36 minutes past 5, deep beneath the Sound, the locked boundary between two great plates suddenly gives way. Deep below, along the gently sloping boundary, the Pacific Plate has been forced beneath the edge of the continent for ages. Locked by friction, the two plates have not slipped, and the strain has bent the overlying rock like a compressed spring. Now that spring releases, and the bent crust snaps back and upward in the sudden motion geologists call elastic rebound. The fault does not slip all at once. Instead, the rupture tears along the boundary, unzipping the seabed for hundreds of miles. The break races outward from the Sound, along the fault at thousands of feet, every second beneath the cold northern sea. A section of the fault roughly the length of the state itself ruptures in a little under 4 unbroken, relentless minutes. This is why the shaking lasts so long. Most quakes end in seconds, but here the rupture travels on and on beneath the water. Because the break travels so far, the ground at any one place is shaken not for seconds, but for minute after long minute. In Anchorage, 75 miles from the epicenter, the first motion arrives as a low, rolling shudder, deep underfoot. At first, it seems like an ordinary tremor, the kind Alaskans know well, and people pause and wait for it to fade away. But it does not fade. It grows. The ground begins to heave and pitch as though the whole city rests upon a rough open sea. In downtown Anchorage, people spill into the streets and cling to lampposts and cars as the pavement rolls beneath them. Along 4th Avenue, the pavement cracks and one side of the street begins to drop away from the other before their eyes. An entire block of the downtown business district sinks nearly 9 feet, carrying storefronts down with the falling ground. Shop signs tilt, windows shatter. The proud new face of the boomtown buckles and folds along a widening line in the earth. Great cracks open across roads and yards, and long scarps step down through the frozen ground like fresh, raw wounds. At the airport, the control tower sways beyond its limits and comes down, and the air traffic controller inside is lost. At Government Hill, a school building is torn apart as the ground beneath it slides, though the holiday has left it empty. For 4.5 minutes, the shaking continues, an eternity to those who crouch in doorways and cling to whatever holds. Those minutes will stand among the longest spans of violent shaking ever documented anywhere on the surface of the earth. The measured strength of this quake reaches magnitude 9.2, a figure almost beyond ordinary human experience. Only the Great Chilean Earthquake of 1960 has ever been measured larger anywhere on the entire surface of the Earth. It releases at least twice the energy of the famous San Francisco earthquake and is felt across a vast reach of the north. It is felt as far west as Dutch Harbor, 800 miles away, and southeast across the border into British Columbia. Far away in Seattle, more than 1,000 miles distant, the tall new Space Needle sways gently in the passing energy. Rivers and lakes slosh as far off as Texas and Louisiana, as the planet itself rings faintly like a struck bell. The energy is so vast that the solid body of the planet itself flexes, and the whole Earth quietly hums for days after. But the greatest danger in Anchorage comes not from the shaking alone, but from the very ground on which its homes are built. Beneath the pleasant suburb of Turnagain Heights lies a hidden layer of fine marine clay, saturated and quietly unstable. Under the long, violent shaking, that buried clay does something few residents could ever imagine ordinary Earth might do. Soil scientists have a name for what unfolds here, a process only beginning to be understood in the year of the disaster. When saturated, fine-grained soils are shaken hard enough, the grains lose contact, and the water carries the load instead. It liquefies. The solid ground behaves like a thick liquid, losing all its strength, unable to hold what rests above it. In that instant, the ground surrenders its strength entirely, and anything resting upon it begins to sink, tilt, or slide. The bluff along the water simply begins to move, sliding toward the sea and breaking apart into a chaos of tilting blocks. A square kilometer of prosperous suburbs slides and collapses, carrying gardens, streets, and homes down toward the inlet. As many as 75 houses are caught in the failure, some sliding hundreds of feet, some breaking where they stand. Families watch in disbelief as the ground of their own backyards cracks open and carries the familiar world away from them. What had been a quiet residential street becomes a jumbled landscape of shattered earth, unrecognizable within minutes. And yet, because it is a holiday and the hour is early, many are spared, and the loss of life here stays lower than it might. The lesson of Turnagain Heights is written into the science of cities. Ground that seems solid can betray those who trust it. The failure becomes one of the most studied landslides in the world, a hard textbook written across the ruined earth. From it, engineers learn to test the hidden ground beneath a city before they ever trust it with homes, roads, and schools. But even as Anchorage reels, the truly deadly force of this day is only beginning to gather along the shattered coast. For the shaking has done more than crack the city. It has torn loose the underwater slopes on which the port towns are built. The deep fjords and steep harbors of this coast are lined with soft sediment, piled up over centuries by rivers and tides. The violent tremors tear these underwater slopes loose, and they slide down into the depths in enormous hidden avalanches. Each collapse shoves the water aside, and a local wave leaps up at once, striking the nearest shore within a few minutes. These are not the slow ocean-crossing waves of legend, but sudden, close, and utterly without warning of any kind at all. In Valdez, the waterfront rests upon a delta of loose sediment that has piled up quietly at the mouth of a deep fjord. When the quake strikes, a freighter has just tied up at the city dock, and townspeople gather to watch it being unloaded. Then the whole underwater face of the delta gives way, sliding into the depths and dragging the harbor down with it. The collapse pulls the sea back from the shore, then hurls it forward again as a violent local wave within moments. The dock and those standing upon it are swept into the disaster, and roughly 30 people at the waterfront are lost. There is no warning, and there could be none. The wave is born at the town's own shore and arrives almost instantly. Later measurements show the local wave surged far up the inlet, rising higher than the tallest buildings of the town. Survivors describe the sea drawing back like a held breath, then returning as a wall that reshapes the waterfront forever. Valdez survives, but its ground can never again be trusted, and the town will later be rebuilt entirely on safer ground. The same terrible pattern repeats itself along the shattered edges of Prince William Sound, town by fragile little town. At Whittier, a community of only 70 people, local waves rush ashore and a number of residents lose their lives. At Seward, the waterfront burns and floods at once as fuel tanks rupture and the sea drives inland across the rail yards. But nowhere is the human cost heavier in proportion than in the small Alaska native village of Chenega on the Sound. Chenega sits low against a quiet bay, its homes and church clustered near the water as they have been for generations. Only minutes after the shaking, a wall of water rises out of the darkening sea and sweeps across the little settlement. Nearly every building is carried away, and the village loses close to a third of all its people in a matter of moments. There is no higher ground reached in time, no siren, no word for what is happening, only the sudden and total loss. The source of Chenega's wave will remain a mystery for decades, its cause hidden somewhere beneath the cold, dark water. Only many years later will scientists trace it to a vast underwater landslide that slid down a steep and unseen slope. In these first terrible minutes, the local waves, born of collapsing seabed, claim most of the lives that are lost in Alaska. They arrive too fast for any warning that exists in 1964, striking the towns nearest the source with no notice at all. Later run-up measurements record waves reaching many tens of feet in the narrow inlets and quiet bays around the Sound. But the earthquake generates a second kind of wave as well, one born not of landslides but of the vast seabed itself. As the fault ruptures, the floor of the ocean is thrust upward across a huge area, lifting the water above it bodily. That displaced water spreads outward in every direction, a broad ocean-crossing wave gathering speed across the Pacific. This broad wave behaves quite differently from the local ones, moving slower across the deep, but reaching much farther. In open water, it is barely noticeable, a long, low swell that a passing ship might never feel beneath its hull at all. But as it nears shallow coasts, it slows and rises, gathering its energy upward into the surging walls that strike the shore. On Kodiak Island, the sea withdraws and returns in a series of surges that lift fishing boats far into the town itself. Vessels come to rest in the streets, and the waterfront is remade, yet the islanders' warning here is measured in minutes. The wave races on through the night, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean at the speed of a passenger aircraft. The distance now becomes a warning, for the far-off towns have hours before the wave from Alaska can possibly arrive. Yet in 1964, there is almost no system ready to use those precious hours to send word ahead along the sleeping coast. It takes observers more than an hour simply to estimate where the great earthquake has struck beneath the northern sea. Hours pass. In the far-off islands of Hawaii, tide gauges rise and fall as the energy of an Alaskan afternoon arrives. The surges are recorded as far away as New Zealand, and even along the distant frozen edges of Antarctica itself. And more than 4 hours after the quake, the wave reaches the small lumber town of Crescent City in Northern California. The first surges seem mild, and people who have gone to the shore begin to return, believing the danger has safely passed. But the largest wave has not yet come. It arrives later than expected, sweeping through the low-down town near the harbor. A dozen people in Crescent City lose their lives, the heaviest toll the tsunami takes anywhere in the lower 48. By the time the first bulletin goes out that evening, the local waves have long since done their worst in Alaska itself. So the tragedy of Crescent City is not only the wave, but a warning that exists yet fails to keep everyone away in time. It is a hard lesson carried far from Alaska, A tsunami is not one wave, but many, and the later ones may be the worst. The lesson lands hard along the whole West Coast. Information is worthless unless it reaches people who will act upon it. By dawn, the energy released beneath Prince William Sound has touched coastlines across an entire ocean and beyond. In all, the earthquake and its waves claim more than 130 lives across Alaska, Oregon, and California. For a quake of such staggering size, that toll is remarkably low, and the reasons say much about chance and about timing. Most of the region is thinly settled. Most homes are built of wood, which flexes and holds where brick would simply fall. And the holiday afternoon has emptied the schools and offices that, on any other day, would have been full of people. Only a handful of those lost die from the shaking itself. Nearly all the rest are claimed by the waves that follow it. When the shaking finally stops, night is closing in, and much of south-central Alaska is plunged into cold and darkness. Power lines are down, telephones are silent, roads are torn and bridges are broken, cutting town from town and help from home. The temperature falls toward freezing on this March evening, and thousands face the night without heat, light, or contact. Aftershocks roll through the dark, 11 of them stronger than magnitude 6 in the first day alone, rattling nerves raw. Smaller tremors will continue for more than a year, a long reminder that the restless boundary has not yet settled again. There is no swift federal rescue in these first hours, for the outside world barely knows the scale of what has happened. So the people of Alaska turn, as isolated communities so often do, to one another and to whatever they can do themselves. Neighbors dig through wreckage for neighbors. Off-duty workers restart generators. Nurses and doctors work by flashlight. In the ports, fires burn where fuel has spilled, and crews fight them through the night with whatever hands can be found. Radio operators become the nerves of a broken region, relaying word of the missing and the safe across the silent miles. Improvised shelters take in those whose homes are gone, and shared stoves and blankets hold back the long northern cold. Across the region, families take in the displaced, and strangers become neighbors in the shared, patient work of endurance. There is no single hero in this story, only 1,000 quiet decisions to help, made in the dark by ordinary people. Bush pilots take to the air at first light, carrying the first true reports of the outer villages to a waiting world. Only then does the full geography of the disaster begin to come clear, town by town, across the broken southern coast. The military and federal aid arrive in the days that follow, but the crucial first night belongs to Alaskans alone. Their response becomes a quiet model of how isolated communities endure, leaning on preparation, patience, and each other. And as the first gray light of the next morning arrives, that light reveals a coastline that has been physically transformed. For the earthquake has not merely damaged the land, it has lifted it and dropped it across tens of thousands of square miles. To the east, on Montague Island, the seabed is thrust upward by as much as 36 feet, some 11 meters into the air. Reefs and shorelines that lay hidden beneath the tide for centuries now stand bare and dry in the cold morning light. Elsewhere, the land sinks instead, dropping several feet, so that forests and fields are swallowed by the rising salt water. Near Kodiak, the land falls, and the town of Homer settles lower toward a sea that now reaches steadily farther inland. Whole islands are razed. Harbors are left too shallow for their boats. The very geography of the coast is redrawn overnight. Fishermen return to find familiar channels gone, a new land where the sea had always been within their living memory. It is one of the largest single reshapings of a landscape ever witnessed and carefully measured in the whole modern age. And it is precisely this transformed land that draws the scientists. for the ruined coast is now a vast open record. Plate tectonics in 1964 is a hypothesis in search of a place where the Earth might show its inner workings plainly. The Alaska coast, lifted and dropped in a single stroke, becomes exactly that place, an open book of change to be read. Among those who come is a young geologist from the United States Geological Survey named George Plafker, sent to map it. He and his colleagues travel the shattered coastline, measuring with care exactly how much the land has risen or fallen. They mark the old high tide lines, now stranded far above the water, and the drowned shores now lost beneath the sea. Slowly, from thousands of these patient measurements, a vast and consistent pattern begins to emerge across the region. A broad belt of coast has been lifted, while a parallel band inland has dropped, in a shape far too regular to be chance. Plafker studies this pattern and asks what single physical motion of the Earth could possibly produce such a result. Plafker's genius is not invention but observation, the patient refusal to accept any explanation the measurements deny. He rejects the tidy ideas of the day and follows the data to the only mechanism that can account for every foot of change. And there is only one honest answer that fits all the evidence he has so carefully gathered along the wounded coast. The land has moved because one great plate of the Earth has slipped upward and over another along a gently sloping fault. The Pacific seafloor is diving beneath the North American plate, and here, in one violent afternoon, it has lurched free. This is subduction, the very engine that the young theory of plate tectonics has proposed, but could never yet fully prove. In the quiet act of measuring a broken shoreline, the deepest argument in the earth sciences is suddenly settled. The distant, doubted idea becomes visible, physical fact, written across a coastline that anyone can walk and measure. The plates are real. They move. They dive beneath one another, and when they slip, they can shake a continent for minutes. A theory that lived on the margins of science steps, in a single season of fieldwork, into its undeniable center. A disaster that strikes one remote coast becomes the clearest proof the world has of how the whole planet is truly built. This is the revolution the ruins conceal, the answer hidden behind the maps of the damage and the lists of the lost. His conclusion, published soon after, reshapes the field, showing the world its first clearly measured subduction quake. In classrooms around the world, the 1964 event becomes the standard example of a great subduction earthquake at work. A remote and thinly peopled coast, with barely a soul for every square mile, unlocks the master key to the living earth. Because so few live there, and because a holiday emptied the streets, the human cost stays below what such a quake could bring. And because Plafker walks that particular coast, the world at last understands the machinery beneath every fault on the globe. The lessons do not remain in the laboratory. They are turned deliberately into the beginnings of protection for the future. Out of the towns, struck without warning, grows a new watchfulness, and the first true tsunami warning center for the region. That center learns to locate great quakes in minutes rather than hours, and to speak its warning clear across the ocean. Expanded and renamed over the years, it still watches the Pacific today, ready to send word out ahead of the racing waves. The very word, tsunami, once almost unknown along this coast, enters common speech, carrying its hard-won warning with it. Coastal Alaskans learn a simple rule, paid for at a terrible price. When the ground shakes hard and long, seek high ground. Building codes are rewritten with the ruined ground of Anchorage in mind, so future cities may stand where this one fell. The shattered towns of Valdez and Chenega are rebuilt on higher land, refusing to place their trust again in the same shore. The measured damage runs past $300 million of the era, billions in the money of our own present time. But the deeper legacy is not counted in dollars. It is counted in every life since saved by understanding the danger in time. Today, subduction zones, like the one beneath Alaska, are watched more closely than any other feature of the restless Earth. We know now that such coasts, from Alaska to Japan to the Pacific Northwest, can wake again with the same terrible force. The quiet question the 1964 earthquake asks is whether each generation truly remembers the lessons paid for by the last. For the plates have not stopped moving, and the strain that broke free that Good Friday is already gathering once again. The Earth keeps its own long calendar, indifferent to ours, and it will one day open the same ledger again along this coast. What that afternoon teaches is not only how the planet is built, but how fragile our confidence in solid ground can be. There are other moments when the Earth rewrote the map and remade our understanding, waiting still to be uncovered and told.